Our next speaker is actually doing this already, shine a completely different light, a different perspective on VR. He takes the perspective of an artist. He is a European artist, a member of the European community. His passport is from Great Britain, but he voted in. So don't give him shit for it. He's suffering already. Please welcome Simon Wilkinson. We're very lucky to have you here. Simon was referred to us by B3 Biennale, and I wish to express my thanks for that. Very cool. So enjoy.
Thank you. Yes, I voted in. Let's spend 1 minute talking about that, please. I voted in. I come from a city. I come from a city where the vast majority voted in. People are very depressed. It's a bad time. I have been trying to find the person who makes my Wikipedia page to change so it doesn't say British but European. This morning I was on the phone. I'm doing a tour of New Zealand in October, and I told them that they should take UK off and put European on. We're still fighting very hard to make this not happen. So it's going to be very interesting. But don't go to the UK right now, it's pretty depressing. So that's my company, CiRCA69, and if you look me up on Wikipedia, you'll actually find two Simon Wilkinsons that come from the same town. The other guy is better looking than me. He's won more awards. I hate him. He probably voted out. So we're not going to talk about him. You'll see that I'm listed as a transmedia artist. What that means really is that I started out in music, I moved across to film, I started doing installation and so on, and I realized that I was really none of those things, and all of them at the same time. So a lot of my work combines multiple platform storytelling, and I'm coming from the perspective of an artist, and I'm just going to explain something quickly about that, what that means to me, and that means my job, as I see it as an artist, is to have no boss. No one tells me what to say. I'm funded a lot by the government, and they don't ask any questions. They just let me go away and do what I want to do. And I see my job as being a voice in the world that no one can tell me what to say. So I can just respond to the world how I want to, and do things the way I want to do them, and have a dialogue with my audience that no boss can tell me I can't have. That's where I'm coming from. And it also has some interesting implications with the way that I use technology. I guest lecture at the Netherlands Film Academy, who are currently building an immersive media department for VR and transmedia storytelling. If you don't know what transmedia storytelling is, if you imagine that a long time ago you made a film and your story was encapsulated in that film, well, now with transmedia storytelling, you're telling your story across lots of platforms all at the same time. We know, for example, that about 60% of people watch TV with a handset with their smartphone, and they're bouncing backwards and forwards between. Somebody like me makes content for both so that they can do that. I'm also, I guest lecture at the Bill Kent University in Ankara, same sort of thing, various London universities, and also I'm the facilitator of this thing, which is a transmedia think tank that happens in Venezuela. And so you can see that I'm really focusing on trying to combine lots of different mediums all at the same time. And most recently, in the last 18 months, it's been virtual reality. Before that, it was sort of a hacked version of virtual reality, using headsets with video screens in. In 2011, myself and a collaborator had a piece of work in the Tate Modern, which used video technology in headsets. And the way that I've begun to use virtual reality has been informed by that work. So I'm going to tell you now about 18 months with the arrival of my first VR headset, the DK2, and beginning to try and make stories with it. That's what the focus of this talk is going to be. I'm going to tell you about 4 pieces of work. One that's finished, one that's in construction, and 2 that are currently, we're trying to find finance for it. And so it's a little journey. That's what 1895 looked like in England. It's the year that the first film screening happened in Paris. You can see straight away that it's a very different era from 2016. And when they first started making film, what they actually did was they started making theater with film cameras. It's a phenomena that any new medium that comes along, even novels, the first novels did this, they try and mimic the medium that came before. So they just kept the camera in one position, and then gradually over a period of about 50, 60 years, they figured out they could have cuts, close-ups, and lastly, they figured out that the performance style could change, that the people didn't need to be acting like this all the time because the camera could be really, really close. And so gradually film became film, but it took a long time. That's what 1972 looked like. I was there. It was certainly in my country, a lot of things were yellow and brown for some reason. And the first computer game to arrive in arcades was yellow and brown, the case anyway. And what they did when they first made computer games was that they made sports, because games are sports, right? So they took an old medium and they applied it to a new technology. And so this gets quite noisy to mind your ears. It looked like that. That's tennis. I'm going to move it because it gets really noisy with the bleeps. But if anybody remembers the Binatone games console, which I do, I think it had 4 sports on it, and they all looked exactly the same, and they're all sports. Over a period of years, the technology changed, and people's understanding of what they could do with computer games changed, until you have companies like the Chinese Room, who come from my town, who now make computer games which are essentially interactive movies, non-linear interactive movies. So it's come a long way, and things are very cinematic looking in the games world now, as you know, and are a million miles away from Pong. So it took a long time, but it got there, and it's still evolving. That's what 2016 looks like, and 2016 is the year that, for consumers anyway, is the year that virtual reality arrives. And it's very interesting to see what's happening. And one of the things that struck me about 2016 that's different from those other 2 eras is that we now have so many platforms by which we can communicate with each other, buy things from each other, interact, mostly free. We've never had that before. It certainly wasn't the case in 1972. It certainly wasn't the case in 1895. VR arrives in a transmedia era, and it becomes one of a multitude of platforms. It's not like film. It doesn't arrive on its own with 1 or 2 competitors. It arrives in a landscape of platforms, and that's really important for me. And the 2 industries that are looking at virtual reality most closely, mainly because they want to make money out of it, fair enough, is film and gaming. But there are some things about film and gaming that are different than if you're coming from my perspective as an artist. One thing is that if you have to make a film that does all of those things in its distribution, in the life of its distribution, then you're really, at every step of the way, you're restricting what you can do in terms of storytelling. There's these stories about how in the 1950s, 60s, people made feature films, zombie movies, and what they wanted at the end of the premiere was a headline that would go around the country saying 3 people died of a heart attack because it was so scary, right? So what they did was they would, at the end of Act 2, as the zombies in the movie were crowding in on the main protagonists, they employed actors dressed as zombies to burst into the cinema and run around harassing people and scaring the life out of them. You can't do that when you're distributing on DVD or Blu-ray, right? That's what I'm trying to say. You can make these experiences with film if you know the room that you're showing it in, for example, and if it doesn't have to do all those things, you can add all these extra bits. You can have fans and things like that to add wind into the air and so on. You can't do that when you have this big, long distribution channel, and film is going to try and use VR in that way, and games equally have these consoles which are very restricted means of distribution. They're good for making money. They're not necessarily good for telling stories. So in my approach to working with virtual reality, the idea was to ditch any idea of even distributing it or any idea of making money out of it and just see what you could do with the medium. So 18 months ago, roughly, I started work at the Netherlands Film Academy, which is the place I mentioned that I do some guest lecturing. They have a motion capture suite, not quite as elaborate as this, but we were using that for our characters. We were using a coder there to help us do the C#. You can see there are two people here. Amoeba and Robot Funk are the two collaborating companies with mine. The interesting thing about that is that both of these came out of the electronic music scene. Robot Funk, Amoeba rather, was a VJ and has moved into volumetric VR using Unity Games Engine. Robot Funk was a coder who made the software to VJ in clubs and was also a musician, but has moved into coding for volumetric VR using games engines. So there are people who are coming from other mediums into this area. The show that we made is finished. This is the one that is finished. It was finally completed in May, but even before it was finished, it had been all over the world because there is hardly any content made by artists for virtual reality. Also, it's awesome, obviously. But there are no competitors at this stage. The festivals that I've gone to, people like MUTEC Festival in Canada, which is one of the world's most amazing digital creativity festivals. We had a conversation 3 weeks ago when I left saying, there just aren't the artists there yet to have a whole festival of this kind of content. And I'm going to show you a trailer. I need to explain this. All of these works that I've done, some of them are from the past. The New Ten Commandments, Beyond the Black Package and Nowhere, from the past. The Cube is the first VR one, and these others I'll talk about later. But important to understand, they all fit into one overarching narrative. So if you go to see one show, and then you go to see another, you'll recognize characters from the previous show, and you get a different angle on the story. So I'm creating this big transmedia universe, effectively, with these shows. And here's the promo. No, it's not. Should rehearse, shouldn't I? Okay. No one had really done telling stories with virtual reality that we could find. There probably were people, but we didn't have access to them. And there certainly wasn't a book that we could go down the shop and buy that told you how to make stories for virtual reality, because hardly anyone's done it. And so our book and our manual in doing this was this comments book. At this stage now, after it's been touring all around the world, it's got about 1,000 comments in it. So every time we do a run of the show, and every day at the end of the day, we check the book to see what people have written. And when people write things that we recognize, yes, that's really important, we change the show. And so we've been changing it actually for about 12 months until we finally said, okay, there's a line drawn there. We could still keep doing this, but we're going to move on and make another piece of work. So these comments I'm going to keep coming back to and explaining to you.
This is the story of something very strange that happened in 1959 in America.
The atmosphere from the off was very eerie.
Really scary.
And even doing something virtually, it feels spooky. And also, I suppose, because I know it is a true story.
It was so weird. One of the strangest things I've ever done.
It was proper immersive.
You want to know more and you want an answer.
That was insane.
I know, it's kind of scared to know more, but also intrigued as well. It kind of made me feel more like I was a part of the story.
Like, it's quite dreamlike.
I felt immersed in it.
I want to know more about the story, but I want to tell other people the story.
Yeah, and I want to go research this now because it's so strange.
You're going to want to know more.
I don't know if this letter's going to tell me more about, but I'm super intrigued.
There are some things I'm going to point out about that video. One is that, so this is essentially a theatre piece. I'll explain why it's a theatre piece in a minute. But those people were all young people. This was on the first weekend we ever ran it as a test piece. We filmed all the people leaving. You'll notice they're all young people. These are people who don't go to the theatre because the theatre is mostly terribly boring. But they came to this, which was very interesting. The other thing that's really interesting is that nearly all of them said they wanted to find out more about the story when they left. That's where the transmedia element comes in, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. But important to say that I'm not using VR as a medium on its own, like people did with film in the early days and like they did with games in the early days. I'm seeing it as part of a palette of tools that can tell the story. The way this works, and these might be dark, these slides, yeah, I'm going to explain it to you, okay? So when the audience member comes into the space where it is, sometimes it's a cinema, sometimes it's a gallery, sometimes it's a theater, it can be an underground car park, it can be anywhere. The audience come into a room and they find a table with a man, normally me if it's in English, sitting on the opposite side of the table, and they're told to sit down opposite me. And we have a conversation for about 2 minutes. That conversation is between us, but it's an introduction to the story. I'm also imagining that they've seen the promo film and they maybe have read reviews from the past and so on and so forth. So they've had some information about the story already. Now we're going to have a conversation for 2 minutes, and then they put the headset on, and when they put the headset on, they find that in the virtual world, they're sitting in the same room across from a stranger dressed in a suit, exactly the same. The room is blue, just like it was. The real room, the virtual room is blue. But now the man sitting opposite them has a television on his head with static playing across it like that. And the story begins. And what's happening there is that it's not a film. So this isn't just playing and they're just watching it. This is an interaction. So what I'm doing with the keyboard there is watching on a screen what they're doing and changing the work, changing what the character sitting opposite them does depending on what they do. So it's an interaction between two people. So everybody's experience is a little bit different depending on how they react. There are buttons which do really extreme. If they're the kind of people who are like really going for it, there are buttons which I call the ninja buttons, which can really play into the psychology of those people. If they're really closed and they're a little bit cautious, we're a little bit more gentle with them most of the time. And I'm going to show you 2 icebergs today. I didn't realize until I was rehearsing, but I obviously like icebergs. The live show itself is like the top of the iceberg, and they come thinking that's it. That's all there is. They're going to go and see a 15-minute virtual reality performance. And they come and they leave, and the majority of people when they leave want to find out more, and they go online. And when they go online, they find out there's a whole lot more, much more. But it's never announced to them, and that's important. It comes from this idea that I had years ago. I was doing music, and I was doing music in venues in London, and then the technology to make films became cheaper, more accessible, and I realized we could make films and put them in the same venues as we played our noisy music gigs. And the same audiences would come, and nobody was making films for those people. And the thing about that was that we could make films very quickly. We were making 1 or 2 films a week, and we knew the room where it was going to be played, so we could make that film specific to that room. So an actor on the screen could point out and tell the audience member in the blue seat to look underneath and pull out a note and read it to the audience, for example. So you can see we can do things because our we don't have a distribution model. We can do what we want. But also it struck me that traditionally there was a contract between the audience and the artist, and it was this. When you walk into the theater, you know the story hasn't started yet. You know that the story only starts when the lights go down. And then when the lights come up again, the story's finished. It's like a little boundary line between fiction and reality. The other thing is that you know that the story takes place in that rectangle at the front there, or on the stage. This side of that little line is reality, the other side is fiction. And I realized we don't really need to have that contract. We've established it over 100 years or so, or longer, with theater, but we don't really need it. And could be quite fun if we started playing with that. So the audience think the show hasn't started, but actually it started 2 days ago. That they think it's finished, but actually it's still going, and they haven't realized. That they hear me being interviewed on TV in Australia, and they think I'm talking about the show, but I'm actually telling the story. So this whole idea of the transmedia content is about blurring those lines between reality and fiction, and obviously virtual reality is a really good medium to do that with. And the subtext to this particular, so this show, The Cube, tells the story of a disappearance that happened in 1959 in America. 8 college kids went missing. They were missing for 2 weeks, and everybody was looking for them. After 2 weeks, what was discovered were 8 letters written by the students. And these letters, they were never found again, but the letters obviously existed. And the letters are really strange. They exist in a museum in Burley in Idaho, and we were a partner with them to take those letters and create a virtual version of what was in the letters. The subtext underneath is the question of what's real. Is this a real story? Is it a hoax? What's real in a world like ours in which Noam Chomsky says 40% of all money is spent on public relations? So 40% of all money is trying to convince you of things. How do we know what's real anymore? And that's the dialogue that's going on within the cube. What happens is that everybody in the cube, there's a letter appears in front of them, they reach out to grab it, they grab it, and when they take there is a real letter there, and when they take the headset off, they've taken a letter from the virtual world into the real world, and when they take it home and read it, it throws up more questions about the story that gives them more ammunition to search on Google. So this was the first time making virtual reality, and I had to start using the games engine Unity for the first time, and I had no idea what to do, and we had access to some academics and various other people that were thinking about virtual reality, and they gave us some assumptions that we should make, and nearly every single one was wrong, as it turned out. So they told us that virtual reality couldn't be longer than 8 minutes, that in tests, people after 8 minutes felt like they wanted to come out. But actually, when we tested the cube, which was initially 7 minutes, people said they wanted it to be longer. Lots of people said they wanted it to be longer. Some people said they wanted it to be a little bit longer. Some people said they wanted it to be a lot longer. And some people, a surprising amount of people, said they didn't want to come back. And I really mean that. Lots of people said, I just wish I could just stay there, which is interesting, isn't it? So that idea that the virtual reality can only be 8 minutes long probably related to the fact that most people's experience of VR was in these conferences where there were 40 Samsung Gear headsets, which is 360 video, which isn't very immersive, and your bag's under your chair, and there's people milling about. You don't know whether people are rifling through your purse or whatever. It's probably related to that. With the cube, you're in a nice, safe room, and people just wanted to stay in for a lot longer. So we knew we had to make it longer. This is an important comment that came up a lot, that people said that whilst they wanted it to be longer, they couldn't pay attention to the story because there was so much to look at. And it made me realize that when you take people into a story in virtual reality, it's the equivalent of taking them in a spaceship to the moon, sitting them in a deck chair with a pair of binoculars to look at the Earth from the distance, and then trying to read them a book. They're not going to pay attention. They're going to be wanting to look around at the moon, and that's what it's like. People are in this new world, and they do things that normal people don't do. They get really close to the table and do this, like that. Normal people don't do that, but in virtual reality, they do. They want to touch everything. They want to pick it up. So if you're trying to tell a story to them at the same time, it's impossible. So one of the ways that we made the VR experience longer was to strip out lots of the story, to just keep very small amounts of the story and to spread it out in a greater distance. And we'll also put in button pushes so that we could wait till they're ready, so that we could see that they're really looking at this. So let's wait, and okay, they've stopped looking at that, and push, and the next part of the story moves forward like that. And then it became 15 minutes. The other thing we were told was that embodiment was going to be really important. If they couldn't see their hands, we were going to be in big trouble. Because in the cube, you have to reach out for things. And so the first setup of the cube had a leap motion on the front of the Oculus Rift. And so what happened was that we put a model of 2 hands hidden away down here, and when you reached out your hands, the leap motion detects the joints in your hand, and you would see these hands come out, and suddenly you've got hands. Except, it works well when your hands are like this, but when your hands are like this, when this knuckle here is occluded by that one, suddenly your arms do this. And so we had a problem, and we had to make a decision. Is it better to leave the hands in and have them imperfect, or should we just take them out and see what happens? And so we ran the same show with hands and without hands to audiences back to back, and something very interesting happened. In the show where they can't see their hands, they still reached out. And when things were there and they touched them, they laughed and they screamed and they had a real reaction. And we realized we were playing a game with the audience, that we weren't trying to create a simulation. We weren't trying to create a holodeck. We were making a piece of art, and we could play games with them. So sometimes they reach out and something's there, and sometimes they reach out and it's not there. And it fed the subtext of the story, which was about what's real and what's not real. So for us, I'm not saying for every piece of work, for us it was much better to take the hands out and to not embody. One of the things we heard people saying was that in VR, and I heard someone say this 3 weeks ago in a speech like this, that in virtual reality, the front 180 degrees is where the story happens, and the back 180 degrees is just for completion of immersion, so that when you turn around, the world is complete. You can look around you, but really you're going to focus here. Now this comes because of a few things. It is how I built the cube, but that was because there was one tracker with the Oculus Rift, and you had to face one way. The first two shows that I'm working on, both with the Oculus Rift with one tracker. But also because the question kept cropping up from filmmakers who are working in VR, how do you make sure that the audience is looking in the right place at the right time to get the story? They didn't realize that what they were doing is they were thinking in a linear way in a new medium which was non-linear. That actually what you could do is just create a room and lit a story around and let them find it in their own order. That you didn't need to have a front 180 degrees. But you're going to hear people saying this for a while. And so the cube has a front and a back. The second show, less so. And the third show that I'm working on doesn't have a front and a back. This was a real concern that because most people trying the cube are going to be in their first virtual reality experience, that they are not going to be able to pay attention to the story because they're going to be on the moon. And so how are they going to pay attention to me reading them a little book when they're on the moon, for God's sake, right? And we got around this by allowing them to get bored quite quick. So in the first thing that happens is you put the headset on, a lot of people swear, people grab themselves, they hold the table, they have a moment, and you need to let them have that moment. And we have a button which starts the show. And we just sit watching what they're doing, watching them in the real world, watching what they're looking at in the virtual world. And when we can see they've had enough, they've sort of quietened down, and now they're wondering what's going to happen, then we start the show like that. And in that way, we allowed them their little first-time VR experience moment. Some people can be in there, they're just grabbing everything, they're looking around, they're lifting their legs up, the whole thing. Some people very quickly calm down and are ready to go. And then once we put that in, we found that people really did get into the story. So people were saying things like they wanted to know more, like I've told you. It's a cool story. It's an enjoyable story. It's an interesting, exciting story. Lots of comments about story, which is a real endorsement. And the other endorsement was that in the first weekend, we measured the online activity that happened immediately after the show and found that 63% of our audience went straight out of the show, straight into the online content. And that meant, in order for them to do that, and bear in mind, remember, we didn't tell them to. They didn't even know that the online content was there. So to go there, they had to be interested in the story. So this was a real endorsement that, yes, you can tell stories in VR, because there have been people who said that it's impossible. This was an academic in Cambridge. The first ever run was in Cambridge, and an academic came. She was actually in the video. She said, she was the one who said, you know, and I know this is a true story, which makes it all the more interesting. She went home, went online, spent 4 or 5 hours on Google searching all the content about this story, the Wikipedia pages, the site for the museum that holds the letters, various other pages that come off that, and she discovered the whole of the story, basically. She ate it up very quickly, and she felt like she discovered it for herself, because no one had told her to go there. You know, when you're at school, like when I was at school, they would give you, they would hand books around, big thick ones, and it'd be Shakespeare or something, and some poor sod would have to stand up and read the first page, and everybody would groan and go, oh no, it's that thick and it's boring. Like the first page is terrible, it's awful, and there's that many pages left. With this type of storytelling, the audience think it's that thick, but actually it's that thick. And they're only going to read the whole of it if they're really interested, and I like that. And this woman wrote a whole essay on her Facebook page, which was great for us because we could see what people were thinking. This woman said, I was always skeptical about VR as a tool for storytelling, and this is the bit that was important for us. It's a perfect match between telling and experiencing. And we realized that when I wrote the cube, I wrote it in a way that I was going to tell the story. And that what we'd effectively done by listening to everybody and what they were saying was realize that we had to let them experience the story. That the telling aspect of it had to become much smaller. That we actually used more visual storytelling and less wordiness. And this led to the development of a second show, which is, it's in production. There's going to be 8 chapters of this show. There's currently 3, but like the Cube, it's already touring all around the world because there's hardly any content. So at the moment, it's touring as a 3-piece story. It's called How Can I Ease Your Mind Without Lying? Again, it's another aspect of the same story. And when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about something that I'd read when I was working with video goggles about, it was a Daniel Kahneman thing, a psychologist, about the human attention. So I'm going to show you a couple of things. What was in the first slide? Elephant. Was anybody confused about it? Did anybody have to count how many legs there were? Did anybody think, oh, it's grey, 4 legs, it's got this thing at the front and big ears, and then work it out like that? No one did that, right? Because your brain just instantly gave you the answer. Can anybody tell me the answer to this one? I'm not even going to torture you with it. Those two situations require different types of attention. And can anybody tell me the answer to that one? If you've got it, put your hand up and then you can shout it out. Yeah. 5 cents, we've got a genius. It's about 30% of people answer 5 cents, and then the rest of everybody else answers 10 cents, me included. The reason is because the type of attention that you use to interpret the elephant is the one that's on all the time. And if your brain thinks it's answered a problem with type 1 attention, it's called type 1, it doesn't allow your critical analysis to step in. So that's why this
Oh my fucking god!
So what's happening there when people fall over is that their type 1 attention thinks that it's figured out in a body way that it's on a roller coaster, and your conscious can't help but react as if it's real. So there's the second iceberg I promised you. These are actually the wrong way around. It should be type 2 at the top and type 1 down the bottom. Type 1 is a type of attention which is on all the time. And the reason it's on all the time is because it doesn't drink any glucose from your system, any physical resources from your system. You can happily walk around the world in type 1 attention all day and you won't get mentally tired. It's also subconscious and without an ego. You're not in the picture when you're in type 1. You don't go, oh, I think it's an elephant. You just go elephant like that. The second type is tiring and resource rich, which is why the brain doesn't want to use it. There was an experiment done in America with parole judges who have to decide whether someone should come out of prison and go on parole or stay in prison for another 2 years. Very important decisions. Somebody's liberty could be at stake, or somebody could get killed if it's a murderer, for example, like that. So that it's very critical decision making. If you're at the top of the pile, the first person to be that have their case read by the judge, you've got about a 60% chance of getting parole. If you're the one just before lunch, when all their glucose is gone, you're not going to get parole. It's almost 0% chance of getting parole because they're mentally tired, because they've been using type 2 attention consistently for a number of hours. And when we think about interactivity in virtual reality, we're always thinking about conscious interaction, but actually the majority of interactions that are happening are type 2. They are subconscious. We look around like we do in the real world. We don't decide, oh, I think I'm going to look over there and look over there in a conscious way. We react to the world like this. And actually the majority of interactions are subconscious and without ego. I thought it'd be interesting after doing the Cube to make a piece of work which is entirely supposed to only get that kind of interaction out of you. I'll show you a film with that. Okay, I'm going to skip that forward and just explain what at the end there is a lot more interviews with people coming out explaining their experience. This is actually a quadraphonic audio installation, primarily. It's an electronic music album made for VR, where the audience come and they sit in the middle of 4 massive speakers, and there's a huge projection above. This is a test run of it that we did in a lab. And so you can see we've got a little projection there. The idea is that some audience members can see it on a big screen, others can be inside, and the audio is incredibly surround sound and directional. And they can't do anything. They can't pick anything up. All they can do is sit back and float through this world and have subconscious interactions with it. One of the things that Unity Games Engine allows you to do is attach sounds to objects and then put properties on those objects, so I can make it so that when it comes past, you get the Doppler effect and you get the sound of it drifting away into the distance. Now when I perform electronic music live, I'm basically doing the same thing. I'm fading certain things up, adding reverbs to things, and constructing a composition in that way. And what I've done with this is let the games engine and the audience member, through their subconscious interactions, do the mixing of the track. So it's different again for each person, depending on where they look primarily. And one of the great things about Unity Games Engine is that it's designed as a quadraphonic piece, but then somebody said to me, can you do it in 7.1 in Scotland? And I went, yeah, and I just clicked a button, exported it, and 5 minutes later we had a 7.1 version. So people who are thinking about making virtual reality, Unity Games Engine that I use, and also there's Unreal engines, they're pretty much the same kind of deal. They are amazing, and they're not so hard to learn. So it's really worth thinking about. And people, again, mention the story. So even without the telling aspect, just experiencing the story in a subconscious kind of way, they were still talking about the story when they came out. And some people were talking about the sound and so on. Some people said they were tripping their disco stuff, which is quite a few people said that. Again, some people said they didn't want to come out. This is a piece that's in construction in a pre-visualization version. And we're trying to find money for it. So you'll remember I showed you that image where people coming from a film background are saying that the story happens in front of you and the background is for completion of immersion. So when you turn around, the world is still there. Well, if anybody's played any games like Dear Esther or Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, you know that a computer game can be a story, and you can just wander around finding the story, opening drawers and finding notes and so on. Games also like Gone Home and stuff like that. So this piece of work is going to be like that. This is a little bit of pre-visualization imagery that we're showing to potential arts funders. And what happens is that you wake up and you're in an apartment block on top of a high-rise, and the world outside is collapsing around you. And what I didn't tell you about the cube is that when you go outside, you get the wind blowing on your face. In this one, when you walk up, so this is with HTC Vive, so you can walk around now, you're not just sitting down. When you walk up to the window, you feel the wind blowing on your face. We're adding interactions which were through what we call ray casting. So imagine an invisible line coming from your eyes. If I look at you, you'll stand up and walk towards me. But if I don't look at you, you won't do that. If I look over there at the TV screen, the television will click on and we'll get the news reporter giving a news report. So now the story and the way it unfolds is now in the hands of the audience. Some of it is conscious interactions like opening a drawer and looking at something. Some of it they don't realize they're doing. They're looking at something, it triggers something to happen. HTC Vive, I don't know whether there's one here, but it's amazing. This is an amazing development because you can walk around, you can do things with your hands, and there's feedback in your hands. That's the kit that we're going to be using. And it fits into this world. It's not on there yet. That's on my website. It's not on there yet, but again, it tells another aspect of this overarching story. So you can see I'm building this massive piece of work, which is a huge, epic story, but you have to go and see 7 or 8 shows to see it all. And finally, an application for funding is going in to start work on a new piece of work which will be augmented reality. So if anybody doesn't know the difference between virtual reality and augmented reality, imagine that my glasses here When I look at the world without them, I see you. When I put it on, suddenly you've all got rabbit ears, or you're all wearing different clothes. So it's adding extra layers of visual information onto the world. So what this show will be, it's ironically enough, because I started conceiving this about 6 months ago, this is a show about borders, which is very topical in my country right now. And the question, are the borders there to keep us in or to keep other people out? Are they there to control the flow of labor? Is really the underlying question in this one. And what happens is actually electronic music show. When you come into the auditorium, what you'll find is a performer, me, at the front, very small, beneath a very large projection. And what will be on that projection is a shape when you walk in. If you hold up your smartphone, you'll see the content. And then that shape will go away and a projection will continue, and different shapes arrive within that projection. And if you hold your smartphone up, you get a second layer of information. And at the same time, when you go to buy your beer from the bar, you'll find that there's an image on there, and if you hold your phone over it, suddenly you'll find a letter lying on the bar, and you can go up close and read the letter, and it adds another dimension to the story like that. So this is not virtual reality, but augmented reality, and using a very large space, so that people, once they get the hang of it, will be wandering around the venue trying to find things within that space. So it's really using the real world as a venue for a virtual story. That's where I've got to. These are some of the pre-visualization images that we're using, which you can barely see up there, but you can see those fences all around the world. And that's how you find me. And that's all I have to say. That's as far as I've got in 18 months.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I'm sure there are questions. Come on, people. I'm not going anywhere. You can do better than that. Well, Simon is going to be here for a little bit, so if you don't dare to ask him a question in public...
Can I ask them a question?
Yeah, please.
Let's flip it over. Has anybody used Unity? Cool. Has anybody used Unity to make virtual reality? Does everybody who hasn't used it to make virtual reality know how you do it? Some of you. There's a button that says VR and you just click it. It's amazing. Has anybody used Unity to make augmented reality? Is anybody using the games engine and doing not only the constructing of worlds, but also the coding of the interactions? And is anybody doing it without the coding? You are, yeah. Cool. Okay, it's interesting. Okay. I was just trying to get because I've been wandering around, particularly in the last 18 months, just traveling non-stop as far as, we've been to Armenia, where they really are using it. I mean, they're miles ahead of us. It's unbelievable, 15-year-old kids. It's like when I was a kid, it was riding BMX and doing skateboards. For them, it's using Unity and making games. And Venezuela and places like that, and there's really not many artists using this stuff or making work that's ready to tour. So, and everybody wants more people to be making stuff.
When and where can we see or experience your work in Frankfurt?
At the moment, it's not coming here. It goes next to, it's going to Holland, and then it goes to New Zealand, China, Mexico, and Brazil. That's the next few places. So it's really doing a diverse range of countries. It's very interesting.
Are you going to show something at B3 next year?
I would happily come here again. Yeah, I'll definitely come. Yeah, great. All right, it's
okay,
a date.
So maybe
it's a
we
date.
can see
High five.
5 episodes then.
Yeah, yeah. No, I would love to come here again.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much. It was
Thank you.
Extremely interesting.
Thank you.
And now we're off to another break where you can all mingle and meet each other and talk about exciting projects that you want to make. And then we'll meet again here at 4 o'clock and we'll listen to Frank Witz.